Yes, and it's one. I don't know. I have the recording and we're ready to go.
Okay. It is 6:01, so let's go ahead. Call this joint meeting together, starting with, regular meeting of Hubbard Planning Commission. We join me for flags. I pledge allegiance to the flag
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
for tonight. So, thank you.
Not capturing video or the audio.
Yeah, it's not capturing them, but oh, I know. Have to turn that down.
Yes.
Let's see if we can hear you now.
Yes.
Oh,
That's better.
thank you. You ready to, would you like to, be sworn in individually or at the same time? Same time, okay? So if you can both come down here. You both raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, John Nash,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully
that I will faithfully
perform the duties of planning commission
perform the duties of planning commission
and support the Constitution
and support the Constitution
and laws of the United States
and laws of the states
and of the state of Oregon.
and of the state of Oregon.
So help me God.
So help me
All
God.
right, welcome aboard. Welcome back aboard.
We just have, thanks for your willingness to serve. We don't have a lot of meetings, but it's really important what we do, so I appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thank you. You make it fun, that's why we're here.
Next up on the agenda is a time extension request, PAR 2023-01. And I believe Holly's got a little background for us.
Yes, sir. This is a brief agenda item for the planning commission this evening. So what we have in our packets tonight is a partition time extension request. This is a 2-parcel partition that was approved by the planning commission back in April of 2023. The partition approval was good for 2 years, and the Hubbard Development Code allows applicants to request a time extension if they meet certain criteria. Those criteria are that they apply for the time extension request at least 30 days before it expires, that there's no substantive change to the applicable development code, that their site plan hasn't changed, and they're able to demonstrate that it's feasible for them to complete all the conditions of approval within that time extension. And so the applicant, Mr. Miller at 336 7th Street, has demonstrated all of those criteria. I've included the partition plan in your packet to refresh our memory. I know it feels like it's been a while since we saw this one. So staff does recommend that the planning commission approve by motion a 1-year time extension. So that would move their expiration date from April 28, 2025 to April 28, 2026. This is not a public hearing, it's simply a planning commission motion, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
It's pretty straightforward. Thank you.
Absolutely.
With that, I entertain a motion to move on this item.
I motion to approve the extension. I don't have the. Second.
Have a motion, second, any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Awesome. With that, we can move on to the work session, which, here's Mayor. Yes. I'll turn the gavel over to you.
First time I got to sit down there and listen for a while. You guys really look up here. Okay, so with that, we'll turn it over. We're now in the Joint Planning Commission City Council work session. Holly, this time I turn it over to you. I mean, or do you want me to give a quick rundown on what we got in our packet?
I'm happy to do that if that's helpful.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. For those with us this evening, just a note, my name is Holly Byram and I work as a consulting city planner for the city of Hubbard. I work for the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments. And I'm joined here this evening by my colleague and supervisor, McCray Carmichael. And then also online, we have another one of our COG planners, Scott White. And so our goal this evening is to get us to a place where we are ready to roll with our public hearings on this very small package of legislative amendments for compliance with some recent housing bills passed by state legislature. So just to recap our February work session. Back on February 18th, we had a joint work session between the Planning Commission and City Council. On that night, the goal was to brief you on some recent, what we're calling housing bills, which require cities of population size 2,500 and above And then there are other bills that apply to everyone. And there are certain legislative amendments that the city of Hubbard is required to adopt. And these are changes to your Hubbard Development Code related to housing production provision. Again, the state of Oregon is experiencing a housing crunch, and so the legislature wanted to identify ways that we could streamline development approval procedures to provide a variety of housing types at the local levels. What we did last time was we did a brief overview, and then we collected your questions. In the memo in front of you today, we've attempted to identify some of those questions and hoping that we can have a continued discussion tonight and get to a place where we feel comfortable moving forward with the public hearing procedures. We know that there will be revisions that you would like to make to your development code that we can't possibly include in this package at this time, both because of the scope of the funding that DLCD has provided and also because of the timeline that we have. We want to make notes of all those additional revisions, and we want to come back to those in a separate package. So let's move through some of the questions here. Great list of questions that came out of our last work session. I'll go through those briefly. Please stop us if we have questions, comments, concerns. Scott White online, he's kind of our housing specialist. He can jump in and correct me if I go astray here also. The first one was, what happens if the city does not enact revisions to comply with these housing bills? At the end of the day, we're still required to comply. If we don't have them in our local code, we'll have to refer to the Oregon revised statutes. That just adds an extra layer of confusion and delay for both staff reviewing development applications and the applicants themselves. So it's easier to, through compliance with the housing bills, enact them into your local code.
So a question on that one real quick.
Yes, sir.
Completely understand, in terms of revising our code to comply with the new housing bill or the housing bills, let's call it that.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's actually ready to go, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, so we can actually have the planning commission vote on that to move that up to the city council, so we can at least get that cleared out of the way.
Yeah, so Exhibit A is just about ready to go to public hearing, and that's what we have scheduled for public hearing in front of the planning commission in April and city council in May.
Perfect.
Absolutely. The next question was just a brief refresher about the different housing types. Just a reminder that a duplex has 2 units on one parcel, whereas a townhouse is a 0 lot line, so shared walls, but each house is on its own parcel. We talked about multifamily, which technically is 3 units and above, either on one lot or in one building. And then we also talked about some smaller home types like a cottage cluster. Some cities recently adopted standards for cottage clusters. Hubbard does not currently have cottage cluster standards, but you do have PUD standards, and you can get to the same end result through those. And then we had a question about what are tiny homes. Oftentimes when you hear the word tiny homes, it's referring to actually a recreational vehicle. There are some new rules coming out soon for tiny homes constructed either on site or prefab moved to site. The next question was about, what does Hubbard need to know about historic district designation? Hubbard does not currently have a historic district designation. You have structures that are likely eligible. The process to have those structures designated and a district designated does take some time. There are pros and cons to that designation, of course, because while you might find that you're eligible for additional grant funds through that designation, there may also be additional restrictions and regulations on those properties in terms of what an owner can do for remodeling or repairing, the materials they can use. That is a conversation we can continue to have, but it won't be resolved this evening.
One question for you real quick.
Yes, sir.
Real quick, back up on question 3, because
Yep.
we jumped over that one. Should the city of Hubbard enact a minimum dwelling size?
Oh, thank you, sir.
That's fine. The only concern I have on that one is I hate putting, I can understand generally market demand is kind of dictating away from that. My concern though is with the new housing bills being passed, possibility of cottage clusters or even tiny homes.
Mhm.
I would still like to see us try to go down a path to at least trying to define that,
Mhm.
only because I want to stay ahead of it and not be, what's the right word? Huh?
Reactive.
Yeah, I don't want to be reactive to it, right? If we're reactive to it, we've already missed that boat typically because the applications come to us. That would be my biggest concern on that one.
So, just so I'm understanding it, the goal here would be single homes on a single lot or a cluster of smaller homes on a single lot?
I would say probably what would a cluster of homes on a single lot look like?
Okay.
That's what I'm concerned about mostly by the new housing that's coming in.
I see.
It would also be great though, if we could even define what we consider a quote unquote cottage
Uh-huh.
size. So if a cluster of a cottage cluster showed up, we can at least say, hey, those don't meet the minimum sizes, that we're looking for, et cetera. And it also would probably dictate how many could actually go onto a lot.
I have a question.
I know that this, council and commission are interested in talking about residential design standards in the future.
Yes,
Having cottage standards at the same time would make a lot of sense.
yes, it would.
And we can bring you examples from other communities who've done that.
Yep, and I know you've got another question on that coming up.
If you want to take a question.
Yeah, this is Bud.
I have a question on, what sizes cluster homes are they? Are they like tiny homes? You know, like,
PBD,
like
yes.
the shit, like the homes that you see that are being built for the homeless. Are they that size and a whole bunch on one lot, or is there a minimum you can have on a lot, and what size are the cluster homes?
I don't.
Yes, it
maybe.
depends.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, like,
It may vary.
10 on one half lot of tiny homes, you know, not RVs,
Yeah.
but the homes that they build for the homeless.
So Ms. Button, that's the whole point of my direction towards
Oh,
our
okay.
city planner, was basically so we can define that, to stay
Okay.
ahead.
Okay.
Yes. But right there, we have a resident expressing the same type of concern. I'm sure anyone on the city council or planning commission will probably hear in the future as well.
What we've seen in other communities is, smaller homes clustered around a common open space like park area with parking around the perimeter, paved paths, more, like senior housing in terms of having a smaller single level
Yep.
size, smaller home to maintain, more of a community feel.
We've got one, I think, apartment complex off of Oak Street that's very similar to that courtyard style
Yeah.
apartments going around the thing.
Yeah.
Nightmare for parking.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would just like to see if we can control some of that. It would be great to see. I mean, I'm not against seeing effective uses of lots. I just don't want to see us shoving so many people in that we have issues with transportation, roads, everything else.
Yeah, a lot of cities adopted cottage clustered standards a couple years ago, and I'm curious how many have actually been tested to full construction.
It'd be interesting to see.
Lessons learned, you know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear that we can actually rely on other lessons, at least
Yeah.
other communities. We don't have to reinvent the wheel the hard way.
Absolutely.
So the clustered homes, we don't have to adopt them, we don't
No.
have to put America.
Yep.
That's,
So for the purposes of the current package, I'm hearing that there's not so much a concern about a single family home minimum dwelling size. Because we know that, providing a variety of housing types is of interest to the city.
Yeah.
Correct, okay.
And my bigger concern is what can they do if they decide to take that single residency lot
Uh-huh.
and shove two on there?
Mhm.
Or have a group of 3 lots and say, now we're gonna put a cluster in here that we're gonna have to deal with. And I don't want to use deal as a negative connotation. What I mean by that is just that we're gonna have to figure out that the community what we want to be. Yeah.
All right, so
I'm trying not to be, I'm not trying to be prejudiced within my own language.
So, question 5 was about a recent fire in Wilsonville and some townhomes. And I think that, this was probably a reference to, was 2019 sound about right?
Mhm.
There was a fire, and it was actually a 3-story apartment condo building. And in that case, it sounds like construction had not yet been completed and the sprinkler system was not yet fully operational.
Yep, that's what Chief Carmen said. when he was
Yeah,
here.
so I think, in that case, it really references back to building codes and, fire codes.
Question on that one,
Yes.
could be interesting, with the
Mhm.
Palisade fires and those that just happened down in California. Is there gonna be any retrospective in a grander scale on, if
proximity of houses could have resulted in even greater damage outside of just obviously the windstorm that was happening and lack of water. I'm just kind of curious.
What's the buzz on the city manager listservs?
We really haven't talked a lot about it.
I'd offer that there's been a fair amount of discussion up in like the canyon around and funds through Marion County on defensible spaces, right? And that is, what is planted, what are the materials that your homes are built out of, and what's the proximity to other structures? So I think, you know, in emergency management, there's definitely conversation and there's room in our planning to be talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also possible, I'm assuming, to also start stipulating building materials that we expect people to use to maybe prevent fires. I don't want to prevent building in the city though, but I'm assuming this houses get closer and closer.
Yeah, I can see that being an incentive-based program, you know, that maybe we can work with the county even on, but, you know, incentivizing new builders with funds that if you use these types of products, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you can get
Just
them.
more of a curiosity thing, quite honestly.
Yeah.
I didn't know if anything was coming out of that, like lessons learned and
Oh, sure,
things that we could improve our codes with.
absolutely. I don't know that it's landed in like a regulatory space of like materials and requiring yet anywhere. Right?
Yeah,
But
even
it-
at Detroit, I mean,
Yeah.
they're building stick homes with architectural shingles, so it's
Mhm.
not,
Yeah.
It's
no
just
metal roofs.
Prettier up there now.
Very
Built it
clear.
really nice.
I think there's also an opportunity to look at landscaping standards and what qualifies as a landscaped area. We want to allow more rocked areas instead of the mulch that's.
And that would be a great thing to take a look at, because I did notice we had on G and third, I think, they had some rock landscape that went in. Looks a lot better than overgrown weeds. I mean, I'm not a super fan of rock, but at the same time, it makes sense, so.
So there's an opportunity to talk about that as well. Let's see, 6 was about, single room occupancies, SROs. And so these are what you would think of as your, I don't want to say fraternity or anything, but shared.
Group homes.
Group homes.
Yeah.
Shared houses where you have, multiple locking doors around a common shared kitchen facility, restroom facilities. And so there are new provisions for single room occupancy or SROs as another option in your local housing mix. 7 was about,
So I do have a
Yes, sir.
comment on that, just kind of, so I'm looking at this and what you partly printed out from the House bill measure here, under about halfway down, number 2, in parentheses, within an urban growth boundary, each local government shall allow development of a single room occupancy. So shall versus well, shall versus we will allow it. So that means we can and we may not, or how does that term legally play out there? I mean, are we required to do this?
shall means shall. Yeah. And so what we've done in Exhibit A is to put the SROs into the appropriate categories of each of their residential zones. Mhm.
Go ahead.
So question 7 was about what standards do townhouses currently need to meet? And that was just a little bit of background education for us. There are quite a few standards already that townhomes need to meet in Hubbard. There's one standard which I think the city could probably consider adding, and that is you could limit how many townhomes in a row are attached. Some communities limit that to 3 or 4. I think there's some justification there for breaking up the visual pattern of a residential neighborhood or pedestrian connectivity. But I think there's arguments of why we would want to keep them as smaller blocks as opposed to one long wall. So that is the only opportunity we could really see there for townhomes you could consider adding.
It says no, there is currently a limit on how many townhomes can be attached to those. So it says there, we do have them.
Oh, I think that meant there's not.
I had noticed some of these, I
Right.
had noticed that,
Correct.
townhomes in the R1 zone, no more than 2 attached units are allowed. That's highlighted in yellow, so that's what you're recommending.
So there's a proposal to add that limitation. Is that something that feels appropriate for your community?
I think it'd be fine. I agree with the line used, visual break, if you would, so we don't have necessarily along the road. And it's not even that I mind necessarily, row houses, terrace houses, whatever you want to call them, duplexes, et cetera. But, you know, unlike Europe, where they're like maybe 1 story, some of these can be up to 3 stories, and that can be a very long block, if you would, or units. So I think 2 is fine, but we'll see what the planning commission approves and sends up to us.
I like 3.
There you go. Oh, see? And I'm not against 3 either, but I do agree. I think if you go around the city now, we do have some that are actually 3.
Yeah.
In fact, I think we might have one that's 4. I know at least one that's 3.
Yeah. And I think it really depends how they're built as well, whether they're alley loaded, so the garage and the car enter from the rear, or if it's in the front, and just logistics of bringing your green yard bins around from one side of the house to the other. I mean, there's some very practical reasons why breaks are important. Sounds silly, but in practice, it's necessary.
Yes.
Excuse me, Michael Carmen had a message in, I don't know if he wanted to talk at this time, but he did put a message in the chat.
Sure, it was probably pertaining to the section that we were talking about the Wilsonville fire, I'm assuming.
So he just said, if he wants to speak now, but he says it also can help prevent spread of fire, so.
Or if you're breaking up the townhomes into smaller sections versus again, a rule of 6 of them, one catches on fire on one end, you can run all the way through.
Yeah, you have Michael Carmen online now, so go ahead, Chief Carmen.
Yeah, my comment was just that about the row homes. The less of them are butted up against each other, the less likely the spread of fire.
Makes sense. So again, we'll see what the planning commission moves up. That's what we have very good members on the planning commission for. We'll have to make the recommendations. I'm not opposed to 3.
And my understanding with the building code, chief, is that a 2-hour firewall is required between those units at the property line.
Yeah, I do believe that is correct.
Thank you, sir.
And now I know what the long, big wall that goes in between the units that are high is, so.
The next question was about Senate Bill 1537, specifically about the adjustments. And just to recap what we talked about last time, the idea here is that those provisions are going to sunset in the year 2032. And so COG's formal recommendation is that local cities don't adopt any kind of adjustment language into their development code. If that type of a request does come into the city, we can reference the appropriate sections there.
Yeah, and the scariest one on that, besides lot size, is parking.
Yeah.
Because again, our state officials believe that everyone drives 1 car in the entire family, and every family has 2 cars because both are usually working.
Or
At least.
public transportation. And a lot of these small cities don't have.
Yeah, we don't. We have CAT. That's it. And if you want to take CAT to Canby and then catch the bus into Wilsonville and then Cape, I mean, your commute becomes 4 hours or something. It's crazy. Is there any way to push back on parking requirements when it comes to availability of transit within the city?
I don't think so. We can think about it, but I don't know.
So there's a formal process to be
Yeah.
exempted from these, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember what it takes to
We haven't done any yet.
secure that.
We can look into what the process of the exemption is.
That'd be great, because at the end of the day, I can see them arguing, I can see lot size being argued and say, you know, too bad your lot width, same thing. Landscaping percentages, same thing. Setbacks, I can see them arguing on that, but parking is the one that scares me the most. Because we already have parking issues across the city as it is.
Yeah.
And don't even get me started on 90/90 and transportation issues, that's a whole different topic.
Yeah. Okay. So a question for Scott White. Have you heard of any cities entering this exemption process? And if so, can they do it on a particular standard, or is it all or nothing?
So I'm sorry, Holly, if you can hear me or not. The exemption was related to parking. Is that what on housing or?
Yeah, so on Senate Bill 1537 and the adjustments, the adjustment category that's most uncomfortable for a lot of small cities is the parking category because there's not available public transportation options locally.
Okay. I haven't yet gone into, of course, what's coming forward to Hubbard is absent 1537 language. And so I think that Holly communicated that well. And it is something that a lot of communities are asking about as far as an adjustment and what process that might be. And I think it's limited to 10%, if I'm not mistaken. I know it's just one of those things yet. I haven't gone forward with it. I should also say I'm not really an expert on housing. Since it is something Holly says I am. I processed code updates for House Bill 3398 there, what's before you tonight, and I've done it for a few cities already, and I've heard the same thing about SROs and various standards that you're looking at there. Yeah, we're trying just to keep up, mostly in the last for year 2022 and 2023, and those sessions that we are introducing, for just last year, yeah, that was 1537 is the one that we're looking at now, and I don't think there's any funding that's available for that purpose, but a lot of communities are asking questions.
That remains to be seen. Who's going to be brave enough to challenge that?
Yeah.
Sean, you're brave.
I think in the City of Independence could challenge that first.
Pockets are feeling deep, huh?
Yeah.
For legal bills. One question that is not addressed in the staff memo, which I'm hoping maybe Scott White can help us with, and I know McCray and I were chatting about this, is the requirement for local cities to do away with public hearings for certain application types for housing. And that's something that we'll need to refine before we go to hearing for the Hubbard Code. My understanding is that we can no longer require public hearings for multifamily housing and subdivisions. Is that correct, Scott?
I think that's another 1537 item. I haven't seen it in the House, the bills that are before the Planning Commission right now. But it is my understanding as part of the streamlining there that city is to have a process where housing development that meets clear and objective standards and clearly meets all of that. There's not a variance application or adjustment application married with that development application. If it meets all of those standards, then it's supposed to have a process that's expedited. What some communities are doing is doing, I don't know if Hubbard's code, I'm sorry if I've got all these codes in my head, but going to sort of this type 2 process where notice is provided, get a 20-day notice if you're a property owner in a 200-foot vicinity, and it just gives a heads up that there is a development plan. It's for disclosure. It does provide the opportunity to present testimony and to appeal the decision. But the notice is really kind of a one that just gives a heads up on the city to make an administrative decision, one that would be in compliance with the laws there, that the project is shown to meet all of the clear and objective standards, and that here's an opportunity to review it and provide comment, but it kind of also gives the recipients of the notice a heads up that the city is likely to approve.
To confirm, this part is not expected to sunset, correct? Or designed to sunset? Okay, do you
Sorry, when I'm reading about the exemption.
Yeah.
What's the question?
The question is about
there's no there's no process changes that are introduced with what's before the planning commission as far as the compliance and what Mid-Willamette Valley Council has been provided as a grant. No due process changes are introduced to the Hubbard Code. Is that as far as?
Is there a reason that at this time we should not bring subdivisions and multifamily housing development review into compliance?
The only reason is the time frame to which, and McCray can speak to that, is the June 30th deadline here that we have to ensure that we have a hearings ready proposal in order to get the funding that we have. So that would be my concern. We have what responsibilities we're to execute as part of the grant agreement. And to add on, all of a sudden, that is the concern.
So Hubbard, for those two types, the multifamily housing and subdivisions, those are type 2 applications, which go to the planning commission, public hearing, and then the planning commission makes the decision. You do have a procedure in your development code already that's used for partitions, which is a type 1 level 2, which is a planning commission decision without public hearing. And from what I'm hearing is that is the appropriate way to go now for these development applications. So,
Yes.
So that's the direction that those would head for the subdivisions and the multifamily housing.
How do we communicate that out to the public so we don't get accused of basically shoehorning through development that we don't have any choice in?
Yeah. So my understanding is there's a comment period leading up to that folks could express concerns.
But it's not an open hearing, so where do the comments go?
Yeah.
They would go to staff to make sure that staff is doing the right thing, and then the planning commission is doing the right thing when they're reviewing.
Yeah, I mean, Mayor, Holly and I were talking on this on the drive over that I was saying, for you all to be able to have the conversation on what you want the role to be. When this is the process that's mandated by the state, do you just potentially want to have it be an administrative decision that can be appealed to the planning commission versus having the public meeting that people come to thinking that they can testify, but they can't, and they feel it's understandable that the public could feel frustrated by that, right?
Oh, very frustrated.
So that might be what, if we move this to the second, deal with the code requirements that we have to by the grant that we have, get that one done, but in the discussion of multifamily standards and this process, how do you want the process to go so that it can be as on the books in your development code as clear as possible to people, that there isn't a false idea like, oh, I got a notice, there's a public meeting where I think I can have a voice and I come in and I just get to sit here and listen to you, listen to deliberation, but not be able to participate. And that's outside of, I mean, this is mandated, right? And I think that's what, as it moves forward, if we have people who are frustrated with it, we can point them back to the city decision. So it'd be worth hearing what you all think about that. I appreciate that you're asking the question, and we've had other member cities that have had this public meeting where people attend, and they could have submitted comment up until the meeting, and they show up and they can't.
My biggest concern is, besides Miss Button, empty room.
Yeah.
Empty room on the last time we had our meeting, and I guarantee you most of the planning commission sessions are probably empty.
Yeah.
City council is empty, but as soon as we have a big Bear Creek thing come up, this room is packed with people providing comments.
Yeah.
And now we're gonna tell them, no, can't talk yet. You missed your deadline.
Yeah.
That you never knew about it because you weren't 200 feet within the resident, the
Right.
public area to begin with.
Well, that unfortunately would still allow public testimony because the PUD component allows a lot of discretion.
Okay, so the PUD, the bigger ones would still require, okay.
Is my understanding. Just speaking from a staff perspective, it would make me uncomfortable to sign an approval decision on an entire subdivision without bringing it to planning commission to have your eagle eyes on it, asking questions, because you ask very thoughtful questions and you can catch things potentially. So there's still value in that for
Yeah,
some of those
absolutely
more
is.
complex
Yeah.
application types.
Yeah, well, the planning commission's purpose, we don't want to negate it, and part of that is we want them to approve it. I don't want it to be administrative function for sure.
Yeah.
Because again, I really like our administration right now,
Yeah.
but in 10 years, I don't know what our administration will look like.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, Sean will be here until she retires, I'm sure.
I'll be retired in 10 years.
So there you go. I gotta think in 10 years, what's the city gonna, who's gonna be leading?
And maybe, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Maybe part of that moving forward is in part of our notice, that we just really make that language like very bold and clear, like if you have comment, like you will, please submit in writing, you cannot come and even reference the Senate bill, the ORS that governs it, right? And just try to make process as clear as possible, and maybe there's like, I don't know, all sorts of things. Maybe there's like little videos that we can post on the website that help people learn about.
We have our town hall, I'm assuming in May, June timeframe. I'm assuming it'll be in June. We'll just, again, we'll have to do some postings to encourage people to show up so they can learn about the changes that are coming their way.
I think we're gonna just have to really ramp up some community outreach, to make sure that people are aware of these changes and, from the administrative perspective, have us gather all that information and then relay it back to the planning commission that this is what we've heard. And then that would be one avenue to make sure that, there is some sort of public comment as part of the process.
Okay. I mean, quite honestly, though, when you go into your next thing, and that would be your question number 9, right? If we, and I know this question and the idea of residential, and I wrote in there commercial as well, design standards or specifications. If we have those in a solid form that we want the city to look like, then it's going to take a lot of pressure off, especially the planning commission on what would the look and feel be of something. If a new subdivision comes in, will it match the community, what we want, et cetera. It might make it easier for the administration as well, at least handling that. But again, that, as you state very clearly in here, shouldn't hold up at least the approval of the language that needs to go into the building codes now, or the development codes, or whatever we're calling it.
Correct. We did include 2 examples just for a good time, but just to get those wheels getting those wheels turning. I know this is something that you were interested in the last time we spoke about this, and I've heard you for a couple of years now talk about commercial design standards.
Yes.
I don't know, in terms of like if there's a relationship there with the urban renewal district having design standards in a certain area. So that's something to talk about in the future.
We would like a uniform look and feel of the city at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have like a downtown LA 1970s where everything has a different style as you went down the street. Again, I can go back and look at what Wilsonville's been doing, beautiful designs of what they want the city to look like, and they're moving towards that design. Sisters did the same thing. Sandy did the same thing. It just has a look and feel that they were looking for. Now, I'm not trying to stipulate what the look and feel of Hubbard should be. We do have a great vision document from the 2000s timeframe, and I've pointed Sean to that quite a lot. And if that's a great way to go, TBD, I don't know. I'll leave that up to the planning commission to figure it out first on what they think the design should look like.
Yeah. I will say that 5 years ago or so, City of Donald adopted some design standards on their main strip there.
Yep.
And it was part of a grant that they had. It's kind of that western facade, and they haven't really been able to exercise it much because there haven't been a lot of new development applications. But they're just about to break ground on a new mixed-use building that will be using those new design standards. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
My concern though with Hubbard is we do have growth on the horizon.
Yeah.
And I'd rather try, again, be proactive on that and not reactive.
Right.
And argue with the developer who wants to invest money and say, no, we want this, and they want something else.
Right, yeah. Okay,
I do want to say real quick, so McCray and I have already found kind of what we have to do to apply for that exemption for parking. So we'll start working on that for consideration.
you can do just one topic.
No, I don't think so. I think you just do the whole thing. I think you just Okay. Request an exemption from
Okay.
all of it, because you have a minor adjustment, you have a minor variance process here at the city, so we ultimately just want to look at, there's a threshold that it says that you've approved 90% of your adjustments in the past 5 years. And if you have, then you can apply for this exemption. They just, I mean, ultimately what 1537 is getting to is codes that don't have an adjustment, like the wiggle room for someone who needs 2 more feet or something, right? That there be that. There are codes that only have a variance and are a pretty high standard to meet, but if you had something, so I think we can go back and work and see if we can meet that criteria.
I don't remember denying any variance in recent years. I don't think so.
We'll take a look at it.
Yeah,
Okay,
but it seems reasonable.
thank you.
Out of curiosity, and this goes back to Minister Wade, is this something we might be able to work with Aurora, Donald, Mount Angel on? Kind of as a group or coalition of cities, or is it something just a single city has to do it on its own?
I mean, that might be something that the COG could do on the behalf of all our members.
And that's what I'm thinking, it's sometimes better to distribute, I know, I see.
Well, no, I think it's helpful because, Holly provides, planning services for Donald, so that would make it very easy, I think,
New
you know.
Jersey too, so, you know. Just saying.
What are you saying?
No, it's just an opportunity to combine forces,
Yeah.
unite.
Yeah.
It's just, I know all of those cities that are gonna be right now, don't have really public transportation. At least until light rail one day goes through Donald.
Yes. Okay, attached to the staff memo was Exhibit A, which is nearly identical to the last time we reviewed it a month ago. I will say, we confirmed all of the minimum lot sizes are accurate as they're required to be. That was one of our questions. There was also a question about the development of SROs. There was some language in here about how the individual units had to be arranged around a core shared facility. We removed that because having that core central facility is not required. It could be on a different floor of the building. We just wanted to make sure there were no additional restrictions in reviewing that type of a development, so. I think the only outstanding question just has to do with the approval procedures for multifamily housing. And that's something that we've talked about. Typically, they would go to a site development review and whether those criteria are clear and objective. So Scott has provided a couple options in the end there, and that's something I think staff is prepared to bring back a recommendation.
So, we go back to the housing bill summary here.
Yes, sir.
A couple of questions is, I was seeing these for, land use bills passed 2022, 2023, and we're into 2025. Was there a reason we are addressing these now, so close to the June 30, 2025 drop dead date? Or, I would just, was there like, you keep talking about a grant monies, were we waiting on some sort of funding so we could go and address these now versus a year ago?
How many communities do you
I
have?
don't quite understand why we're working with this between now and June.
Yeah, we applied for these funds through DLCD 2 years ago, essentially now. Essentially had the contract in place in November of, I guess I would say 23, and have just been moving forward. So we have this for 10 of our members. We adjusted for 2 that we are not proceeding forward with. And timing wise, Holly has 5 cities that she does planning with. So strategically, we initially rolled out the work that each planner would work in their cities that they had, and then we started realizing just getting legislative amendments versus current, planning applications. Moved our work around a little bit and had Scott, support Holly in doing the amendments. And then, when we made that choice in the fall of last year, just scheduling and the holidays and that kind of got us to now before we were here. So, just workload management really has us here.
We had also had some discussions about the timing of the mixed use code language and the psilocybin language, because at
Yeah.
one point we thought we'd be dealing with that as well.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a timing of which comes first.
And the new HB 4064, the manufactured homes, prefabricated structures. It talks about federal government may not subject manufactured homes, so forth, so on, as necessary, comply with protective measure adopted, manufacturer certified. So at one point in time, and I don't know if this is still there were certain safety considerations in manufactured homes, as in site placement. I remember this again a number of years ago at this point, but when I was working with my mother and her mobile home, they had certain size cement runners had to be underneath the home, had to have tie downs were actually what we did is we had them put into the cement so it dried when you tie the home down. Are those standards still, those types of standards still in place? Or are they, or does this negate those type of safety standards?
This does not negate safety placement standards.
Okay.
So the placement permits are still issued through Marion County, just like they do for our building permits here for a state built home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One question for you. Jumping into the suggested changes on page 29 and 31. I know there's gonna be a jump in there. Yeah, on K, townhouses in the R2 zone, no more than 2 attached units allowed. And then on page 31, dimensional standards. Underneath section .04.3, multifamily dwellings of 3 or more, or townhouses with 3 or more. And then down on 4, townhouses for 2. Is that gonna be causing a lot of confusion on, do we allow 2 or more or 3 townhouses?
I think this may relate to some confusion about definitions for multifamily housing.
Okay.
So typically you consider a townhome a single family attached. But when you get 3 or more, it becomes technically multifamily in some categories because you have 3 units attached, even if they're on individual lots. Does that get at the question here?
Somewhat, but do you feel that if a developer is really trying to split hairs, he's gonna confuse 3 and 4 or argue that you can attach more if you want? I'm just trying to make sure that it's
Right.
super clear.
So on this page, it says, multifamily or 3 townhomes or more is 3,630 square feet minimum lot size, whereas 2 attached townhomes is 2,500 square feet. And the reason that is because the 2 attached units would be the same as the duplex dimensions, which would be 2 units per the 1 single family lot size, which is the 5,000 square feet.
Got it.
And Scott had to explain
If
that.
it makes
me
sense to
last
you,
week.
I'm fine. To
Well-
me, I've read that as like, boy, it feels like I can split hairs and
Right.
argue.
Right, and it didn't make sense to me initially, but Scott very patiently explained it to us last week.
Then the other question goes back to again, with what Phil was saying earlier, right? Are we gonna allow 2 homes in consecutive or 3 homes? And again, I guess it depends then on lot size at that point in time. Lot size and zoning.
A lot of communities limit it, to 3 or 4 in a row, and I think that's perfectly reasonable thing to do if the city wants to. You know?
I'll leave it to the planning commission on that, but I don't disagree with 3 if the lot size allows, and 2, definitely if it's a smaller lot size.
Mhm.
But again, I don't know if you need to make those adjustments then before you come back with a public hearing in April.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's April. Because my understanding is the changes we see in yellow here are gonna come back for the open hearing for the planning commission
to then approve to send up to city council.
Right,
And we don't want to delay that, so hopefully you can get the feedback you're gonna get now.
yes. I appreciate it.
My apologies, I should have probably submitted my questions to you much earlier. But nothing else right now has been standing out to me.
So well, I've got a couple of questions. I'm on page 9. And, so manufactured dwelling, manufactured home, manufactured dwelling park. So first off is the manufactured dwelling versus manufactured home. So we've got, two very similar type of structures here. A residential trailer, mobile home, which is kind of like a manufactured home, isn't it? Prefabricated structure or manufactured home, actually, it says manufactured home right there. Manufactured dwelling does not include any so forth, so on. You come down to manufactured home, and define that separately. So manufactured dwelling park, is this a mobile home park? Or is that, because we got a manufactured home subdivision, manufactured dwelling space. I get a little confused about those. We've got different definitions here for a dwelling park, a manufactured home subdivision, and a manufactured dwelling space. I mean, that's just not clear enough for me between a home subdivision and a manufactured dwelling park.
Right. So Hubbard is unique in that you have a manufactured home zone, and that's not something that most communities have. Scott, do you remember this part of the code, and can you help me with the splitting hairs here and the definitions?
I can give it a shot here. So what you have in front of you is verbatim what state law rules show. And so I think what's shown in the staff note boxes there, we may have provided some comments just to say that we've updated exactly what the state statute or rule has for those. This is not an area I'm an expert on because I remember seeing some sort of seminar that somebody was explaining the new state rules and what's the difference between one versus the other. And so there is a graphic for that purpose, and we can dig it up if the planning commission wants to see it maybe during the public hearing to kind of show that different. I can send it over to Holly, and I didn't think it was a great graphic, but it did kind of show a little bit as to what the differences were, and to me some of them were slight. Manufactured home park, yeah, that is an area typically where you do not have a division of land. You have a leasable area. In most cities, that's what a manufactured home park is. And so that's what it should show there, if that was the question about the manufactured home park.
Manufactured dwelling park. As I was trying to read through this, I'm thinking, is that an RV park? Like similar to what is just this side of Candy next to Clackamas River on the east side, that is, I believe, the highway.
So it would not be an RV park. It would be.
This is not an RV park. This is where you put
manufactured home. Yeah.
Okay. So, all right, yeah, I was just a little confused about all that definition. I highlighted the heck out of this thing going, it was already highlighted. So yeah, it would be very, very good if you could provide that graphic, at least to the planning commission, and help that. And then maybe when it comes up to city council, I'd really be interested in looking at that.
Yeah. So just to follow up on that, the manufactured home park district is a zone in Hubbard that's not in most communities. And that's on page 42. And that zone allows for manufactured homes in a subdivision. and the conversion of manufactured home parks to a manufactured home subdivision and manufactured home parks. My understanding is that park has leased spaces where manufactured homes can come and go with placement permits, whereas manufactured homes in a subdivision has platted lots. Is that accurate, Scott? And that the manufactured home park inherently has leased spaces?
Yeah, I mean, it really definitely.
So that would be like one owner and they would
Yeah.
lease out the individual spaces
Yeah.
versus everybody owning their own piece of land.
That's
Okay,
right.
all right, that makes a lot of sense.
We have several examples of that here in Hubbard, where they're all leased spaces. Some of them are older and they make it kind of difficult to look at different setbacks, rules, and we've had some times.
Also, similar to the mayor earlier, I was having some confusion about lot sizes, but I think that between his answer and doing some digging around, he's able to sort those out where he was adding SROs and townhouses in the various zones and reading through here. So I think I have that quite an answer. So that's all I would have for right now.
Okay, let's open it up for other feedback from other members. This is the time to let Holly know if you have any additional questions, concerns. We just appointed you, so it's kind of, putting you on the spot if you had a chance to read the entire thing.
I did read the whole thing.
Well, there you go.
I had it over lunch.
Impressive.
I think I fall asleep when I was reading it over lunch. But no, this is the time if you have any feedback to provide. I don't need to call you out by name. Just go ahead and provide it to her. That allows us to at least get something that's ready to go for the April session, both open hearing as well as approval. Keeping in mind, this doesn't include what we're asking about. Next steps would be the design requirements, architectural requirements, commercial and housing.
Question 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th bullet point, multifamily.
Yes, sir.
I don't see any maximum heights or maximum stories.
So typically the dimensional standards are found in the zone. And so that's where you'll find the setbacks, the height limits, the lot coverage and stuff like that. So it depends which zone we're talking about. But to use, let's say the R3 zone as an example. So looking at page 30 is where the R3 zone starts.
Read one question of the day.
No, this is great.
No questions, Beth.
Yes, sir.
Helps educate some of us that have been here a while too.
Yeah, so the R3 zone is your highest density zoning that you have here in Hubbard. And so typically the way the zones are organized, you have your outright permitted uses, you have your conditionally permitted uses, then you have your dimensional standards and your development standards. So the dimensional standard for the R3 zone is on page 31. And this is where you'll find the minimum lot size, the setbacks, and then the heights. So in the R3 zone, for example, the maximum structure height for your principal structure is 35 feet. And then there's separate height limits for accessory structures.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And then based upon how many stories are in the primary structure, your setback changes also. So for example, let's look up here. For your rear yard, it's 10 feet for 1 story or 15 feet for more than 1 story. Or your side yard can be 5 feet, 7 feet, or 9 feet based upon how many stories are in the building. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna get any condo towers. You never know, but in this case, yeah, we're restricted.
With the small structures, for instance, in someone's backyard,
Mhm.
are there going to be any requirements for sidewalks from structure to structure to the main structure to the street?
So this sounds like it's a accessory dwelling unit question, and the ADU question. Flip to your ADU standards here, I think we have those included, yes. Page 46.
No.
We dug into the ADUs about 6 years ago. I think.
But yeah, so ADUs, this was Senate Bill 1051 back in 2018, and this would required all cities over 2,500 population to allow ADUs. These are your ADU standards. They're intended to be clear and objective so that they can route through just a building permit procedure. They don't need any public hearing, no planning commission involvement. I think at that time, we all felt like there was going to be a rush on ADUs, but I think we've had maybe one, two.
It wasn't a rush, surprising.
Right. And I think cities approached it differently. Some welcomed the opportunity for more housing types and others were very cautious. And so your standards are here. The question I heard was about pedestrian connectivity and specifically sidewalks and walkways. I don't think we had a standard requiring a walkway between the ADU and the primary structure. That doesn't ring a bell with Hubbard.
Yeah, I don't think the sidewalk would pertain to it because it's not a new construction on the street facing side, right? So if there was no sidewalk there beforehand, I'm assuming we're not forcing them to put one in when they put an ADU in. But you'd think Fort Brown will give a pass at least.
Break it in or something.
Stepping stones, something.
I was thinking the same thing.
One thing that Hubbard did with their ADUs that was unique and useful, a lot of communities struggled with whether to charge full SDCs for an ADU. And Hubbard already had a reduced rate SDC that I think you use for apartments. And so that was really helpful to have a reduced rate SDC. So you weren't charging the full cost for a unit that wasn't going to have quite the same burden on your system.
I didn't know that. What's the percentage reduction on that?
I want to say maybe it's 70% of the full, maybe.
Not too bad.
Yeah. So they still pay their share, but not as you would a 4-bedroom, you know.
Yeah.
I know the argument on that was just that, right? It's a small little dwelling in the back shouldn't have the same impacts.
So you mentioned something, 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom SDCP. It would be an SDCP for the ADU its own, or would it be the 4-bedroom? Or there is no such thing as 3 or 4-bedroom SDC. It's just a SDC on a single family and so on.
Right.
So it would be two SDCPs on the ADU.
If you built your primary home and your ADU at the same
Yes.
time, yeah, they would be.
There
yeah.
would be two.
Mhm. Yeah, so it says that the ADU shall have separate water and sewer connection meters from the primary dwelling. So you have all the same standard hookup fees and then the reduced rate for the SDCs. And then the reduced rate is already on your SDC schedule in your municipal code.
I think it has its own street address too, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's good for emergency response if
Yep.
grandma falls.
Lifeline.
She doesn't have a sidewalk.
We can get to her. No, but no. I
Day
remember-
one, and he's already pointing out all the flaws. All right, we want your feedback and questions, before we have our final version, so, if you go home tonight and you're gonna read this again, let us know what questions you have, we really want to get it right.
And my request, since we are gonna be closing a meeting, is to send those to you directly and probably copy Administrator Wade.
Yeah,
But don't send it to everyone sitting up here.
let's route them through Vicky or Sean, and then they will forward them to me if they can't answer
Yeah.
them. That sound good?
Yeah, just don't respond to everybody.
Don't reply often. All right,
I heard from Mr. Nash. Anyone else have feedback now they would like to provide? See, that's not in
The cluster homes are, I just don't see how we could do it.
Neither do I. We're gonna have to look at that though in language following
Yeah.
at least the adoption of the language.
Yeah, you know, something along those lines. I just don't see it in this town.
No, I think Administrator White sent out a great example of what we were concerned about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. I drove down there and, yeah.
So again, that's language we're gonna have to look at, I think, once we're done with at least getting this one approved. That, and again, I would put that up along the same avenue of the architectural designs, et cetera, which is one of the reasons I begged some of you to please be on planning commission, because we need that type of thought and critical insight into what we want this city to look like. Now is the time that we've got to put that in proactively and not try to be reactive and wish we had done something different later. So maybe you guys will meet more than just 6 times a year. And maybe not twice a month.
All right, I appreciate your time. Let us know if you have questions. One of my colleagues at the COG has some really nice PowerPoint slides that we use for the public hearings. Is that helpful, especially if we have members of the public show up? Any particular graphics that you feel would be helpful explaining some of these concepts? SROs, maybe?
Probably a graphic on what is an SRO, what is R1, R2,
Yeah.
what does a lot size mean if it's a single occupancy residency
Yeah.
Versus a multi versus a townhome. I mean, simple graphics on, I mean, just like a picture of a house, right? This is a single family residence. Goes a long ways, if anyone shows up.
If anyone shows up, yeah.
But again, it would also be beneficial for us to have it on hand at city council if anyone shows up.
Yeah, sometimes we use these terms so often that we forget to bring everyone else along with the conversation.
It's also something that possibly we can publish on our website, social media site, public education, any way we can go. You can't go wrong with it. Just make sure it's publishable.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's nothing else for that, German, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn?
I'll second that.
Yeah, motion, a second, all those, I don't think we need discussion on that one. So all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? No, we're adjourned. Thank you all.